First, I'd like to say really thank you, especially Uni and George, for having been so supportive during my stay. And I'm very glad that I have this chance to talk about the stories in a very superficial way, because you are all experts, and I'm just a foreigner talking about American literature. But anyway, I really like to share my ideas, and I really look forward to hearing from you about your comments about these two short stories. How many times have you read the first short story, The Velvet Glove, the glove one? Okay, good. How about Velvet Ear Pads? Excellent. 5 times? Oh, that's good. You know, they say that if it's not worth reading twice, it's not worth reading at all. So that means Harry James' short story is not so popular. But I'm not saying that Harry James is not a great writer, because I just want to emphasize my point. So here's my argument. I want to elaborate on the affinities between these short stories and discuss how Edith Wharton subverts Harry James in her story of Velvet Ear Pads in a way that the master narrative is no longer dominant in her story, and also in a way that she expresses her artistic values. So we have 3 parts, and first I'd like to introduce the scholarship on these 2 short stories, and second I'm going to give analysis of the first story, and I named my second part Midnight in Paris because this is one of the 3 movies I have seen since during my stay, and these 3 movies actually are both about writing, living, gender, and class, so perfectly relevant to my discussion of these 2 short stories. And then the third part is Midnight in Monte Carlo. You know that. So both stories are set in France. You also notice that I have quotation marks for Wharton and James, which means Wharton is modeled in the first story, and James is modeled in Wharton's short story. So you can see my purpose in doing that. So first, who can give us a very brief summary, 1 or 2 sentences of the first story by James, Velvet Glove? Anyone would like to do that? John?
Okay, professor meets woman, professor becomes slightly enlightened.
Slightly enlightened. Okay, and then how about the detailed story? So we have an outline. We have, how many characters do we have? Yes, 3 major characters, very good. First one, Mr. Barrage, John Barrage, is a distinguished male novelist, and he is very much obsessed with his literary authority. And then we have the second character, the female protagonist, which is known as Princess. And actually, she has her pen name, Amy Evans. And then the third character is the young lord. So what's the connection between these 3 characters? First, we know the novelist is so obsessed with his fame that he believes everyone adores him, including the young lord, the fair and fresh gentleman. But only to find that this young lord wants to recommend Amy Evans' novel to this distinguished male novelist. So he feels extremely wounded. His pride is wounded. And then he tries to silence this female novelist by saying that your book is worth nothing, so I'm not going to write anything for you as long as I live. So this is the plot of the short story. And then we have the second story. I think George has read 5 times, right? Would you like to summarize the story for us?
Well, in a novel plot device, professor meets woman on a train. And metaphorically, professor gets driven off the rails.
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting story about distinguished professor, and he tries to shut himself from the outside world. And he meets the princess, equally the princess, but the Russian princess, whose name is Betsy. And she actually turns out to be defeating his masculine pride and also his preoccupation with the seclusiveness. So she succeeds in doing that, not only in this way, defeating him, but also in silencing him by showing that I have written a play and I'm going to publish my play at my own expense without resorting to any external support. So we have another central character. Similarly, we have three major characters. You see Professor Loring and Betsy, and then what's the third one? Yeah, Train. What's the role of Train? Train actually serves a kind of string connecting these two characters. And his purpose is to collaborate with Betsy, our princess, and our playwright in defeating this male distinguished scientist writer. In what ways? You know, how do critics comment on these two short stories? I think that's a very important part to start with. So this is my first part. In fact, three major characters have analyzed James' short story, and the first one should be very familiar to you if you're familiar with Henry James scholarship, Tintner. Adeline Tintner suggests that, okay, this is a story about a literary joke, and this joke, the butt of the joke is whom? Whom do you think? Edith Wharton. Because Edith Wharton plays two roles. The first role is Artemis, and the second role is scribbling. You know scribbling? You know, scribbling actually has been used by Nathaniel Hawthorne for American women writers. So similarly, James uses scribbling princess to refer to Wharton. Okay, so that's from Jamesian scholar, and then this E.C. Kissinger Jr. follows the lead in saying that, okay, in this short story, Henry James bids the farewell to the muse. Okay, in his, I'm not sure whether this critic is a male or female, I cannot tell the initials, but in this critic's view, it says that, you know, it's the muse. So their ideas are very similar to each other. How about the last one? You might notice that Victoria Cousin, of course, a female critic, and in her words, beneath Henry James' frustration, Henry uses Edith to confirm his impotence, his powerlessness, and I'm sorry, and Edith uses Henry to confirm her inviolability. That means I'm invulnerable. No matter how sharp you are, I'm not going to be defeated in your terms. Then, what about velvet ear pads? You see, equally we have three critics, but for the first critic, she is a very well-known Whartonian scholar, and Ben Stock. She said that this story about velvet ear pads is what? A comic send-up. You know, send-up is a kind of parody of Henry James' story, 1909, The Velvet Glove. But the point is, Ben Stock only very briefly, she uses just one sentence, passing mention of this similarity, of the connections between these short stories. And we know the second one is a biographer. You know, in 2007, she published very famous biographer, also Virginia Woolf, and Edith Wharton. So she wrote in her biography of Edith Wharton, saying that this caricatures Wharton's desire for quiet seclusion, exactly like the professor does in the story, as against the turmoil of the casinos in Monte Carlo and Ghana. So you can see that as a biographer, usually people tend to associate their life experience, the author's life experience, with the characters in the short stories, which is not, I'm not saying that it's not fine, but anyway, it's not academic enough. And then the next critic, actually, we know this is a very well-known novelist, Margaret Drabble, and she says that Wharton actually tries to show that she is interested in this theme. What kind of theme? Because this story talks about the investment in the money, and so the sudden acquisition of wealth in the short story. Okay, what's my point? I would like to discover the parallels in these two short stories. And actually, there are more than that. I just try to summarize these parallels in three aspects. First, the setting. So both stories are set in France, Monte Carlo, and Paris. And we know that in 1908 and 1909, Henry James and Miss Wharton had a tour in France. So we can see the connections between the personal life experience of the authors and also the characterization in the two short stories. And second, if you have a tour, of course, you need to have the means of transportation, and you have the motor rides. So in these two short stories, we know that in Velvet Glove, it says that the novelist takes the motor, actually belonging to the princess, to her apartment. And then in the second story, we know that this professor, Mr. Loring, hopes to find a place to live where no motor can access. So you can see the subtle links between these two stories in terms of setting. Then how about characters? Now, we talked about three major characters, and now we have three pairs of major characters, I should say. So the first pair, male authority figures. We know in the first story, this writer is really powerful because he is literary star and celebrity. And in the second part, we know that Henry James has been referred to as master. And this word, master, and also maestro, has been used in Wharton's story to refer to the theater manager, in fact, not that professor. So we can see Bessie plays a joke on that character. And also in Velvet Earpads, we feel that Herbert Spencer, Einstein are mentioned. So what's the connection between Spencer and James? Actually, there are many commonalities. For example, Spencer and James both were bachelors and both dictated their writing to their secretaries. And both were instantly popular for a time, and also both were nominated for Nobel Prize in Literature. In fact, for Spencer, it was done in 1902, but for Henry James, Edith Wharton helped him a lot to get nominated for Nobel Prize in Literature, but eventually it's a failure because, you read his story only once, right? You can imagine why he didn't really achieve that success, but I'm just kidding. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Henry James. But anyway, now the second pair of characters, two princesses, we see the settlings. One is the English one, and the other is the Russian one. So for the first one, for James' story, we know this princess is a lady novelist, right? And she has written a novel which is entitled The Velvet Glove, right? So she has been criticized for being so romantic and not being qualified to be a writer, not to be a writer's woman. So we can see that this male novelist is doing something really harmful to this lady novelist. But for the second story, we have very clear, explicit attachment between the playwright, Bessie, the princess, and also her fiancé. They're going to get married. So we can see the links between these two stories in this sense. And talking about princesses, actually, in the first story, we know that Angel has not been referred to at all. But we know, for Henry James, Edith Wharton is like an eagle. What kind of eagle? What kind of animal? What kind of bird is eagle?
Predator.
Yeah, exactly, predator. So for Henry James, Edith Wharton is angel of what? Devastation. Because she's so energetic. She wants to do so many things. And she wants to meet people, socialize with people. And she's good at doing that, and also good at writing. She's very successful. But Henry James just doesn't have that kind of taste. He doesn't just like Edith Wharton. But in the second story, we have the angel stuff, which is used to refer to whom? The guardian angel refer to the professor, who is guardian angel for the princess, for Bessie. But the third pair of characters, we have this young lord and Mr. Train. Okay, what are their roles? we can actually detect the homoerotic representations. I'm not saying that Henry James is a gay, but I'm suggesting that, these are very clear in these two short stories. For example, let me try to give you some evidences. In the first story, young lord is very fresh, very fair, very charming, and Henry James, sorry, not Henry James, I should say the novelist, Mr. Berridge, thank you. Berridge actually tries to feel that, okay, you are my beloved, I really like you, but you really don't like me because you go to Amy Adams, you think she's charming, so I feel deeply wounded. So this is kind of a homoerotic representation. But in the second story, we know Edith Wharton arranges the narrator to say, for the driver, to say to the professor that this young man doesn't like your looks because you are old. You are 57 or 56 years old. So that's a direct attack at Henry James' homoerotic representation. Of course, you don't have to agree with me, but these are the clearly evidences that I can draw from the text. And in terms of themes, we observe that, as I mentioned, the three movies. Okay, I watched Midnight in Paris. What are the other? I watched with Elizabeth, my friend from University of Maine at Farmington, and she's a novelist. She has written a novel based on Edith Wharton's novel, Ethan Frome, Xena. And we watched a movie which is called Stranger Than Fiction, right? Yeah, this is also about writing, living, gender, and class. So obviously, these two short stories touch upon these themes. Okay, after discussing these parallels, what do you expect me to talk next? I'm going to give you a closer analysis of two stories. Okay, now about the first story, Wharton and the Velvet Glove. Actually, I feel that Mr. Berridge suffers from, or actually he's so obsessed with his fame that we can say that he is narcissistic. And we can also say that he has a kind of proprietary gaze at women. What is proprietary gaze? You feel that someone or the charming lady belongs to you, right? This is the subject. This is the object. She is not a subject. She has no right to her interpretation of her identity. I'm going to interpret her in my terms. So this is his narcissism, and this is his preoccupation with the gaze. But when he suffers from the wounded pride, for many critics, they just choose to ignore the evidence that, like Tintner and Kersinger, the first two critics, they point out that, okay, Edith Wharton, you are no good, you're not a good writer because you are rich, you're wealthy, you need to be, you don't need to write, actually you need to just live and enjoy life, getting some romantic relationships with men, okay, that's their point. But in fact, in the story, we see that Mr. Berridge actually misjudges the princess because for him, when he feels he has been wounded in a very serious way, because Miss Evans goes to, of course, is entangled with the young lord, and of course she also goes to the dramatist first, and next to the sculptor, who are also men, very distinguished, not to him. So he is the one who has been, left in the cold, right? So after suffering this kind of masculine pride, being wounded, then he jumps to the conclusion that, okay, Amy Evans, you are romance. You are not fit for writing at all. I'm going to silence you. Remember in the short story, he says that, no, please don't say anything. If you do say things, those things really matter. So that means for Mr. Berridge, this Amy Evans has been regarded as a kind of object for his aesthetic desire or kind of masculine pride. And then we know that in the story, the novel has been mentioned in addition to The Velvet Glove, another novel is mentioned. That is The Top of the Tree. And remember when the young lord presents the copy of the novel by Amy Evans to Mr. Barrett, the title is The Top of the Tree, and also the book is like the apple, that is ripe, the ripe apple to him. So this reminds us of Edith Wharton's novel, which is entitled The Fruit of the Tree. So that is why many critics say that, okay, this is Wharton, because Wharton, actually, in reality, she asked indirectly through a newspaper editor for James personality paper, but eventually Henry James declined because he thought your book, The Fruit of the Tree, which is about socialism, and which is totally actually supports the evidence that, I read a paper thanks to Elizabeth this morning on the train. Jonathan Franzen wrote a paper about Edith Wharton because this year is her 150 years birthday, and that article says that Edith Wharton is not concerned with socialism, is not interested in working class. She's just a privileged class, and she's no good for writing novels, other than the novels about rich people, which is not true. But what is Wharton's response? So if critics point out, okay, this is a literary joke on Edith Wharton, how did she respond? She did write her responses in her memoir, A Backward Glance. And in that book, she said that, okay, Henry James wrote this story, The Velvet Glove, and then you all think that this is kind of irony, some kind of irony, directed upon a novelist, English one or American one. But what I'm saying that it's not an irony, because otherwise it will be too easy. I think for Edith Wharton, it is wistfulness. It's a sense of loss. Something similar to what Mr. Barrett suffers or experiences in the short story. And it's also kind of poetry. So something beautiful. So then, how did Edith Wharton respond? Not in her memoir, but in her short story named Velvet Ear Pads. You see the connections, actually, the velvet, the color, and also the glove and the ear pads. And it's a really interesting story. Now we see that Mr. Loring, any name that Edith Wharton chooses for characters is not without any meaning. So for Mr. Loring, you can see that the meaning of the surname means what? Renowned fighter. So he is renowned. Henry James is the master with the young followers, the young adorers. And Mr. Loring tries to feel that I'm a really distinguished author. I have written Elimination of Phenomena, which is really very popular, and I'm going to put on my ear pads. I'm going to focus my attention on writing another book. What's the title of the next book?
Refutation of Einstein's relativity
Yes,
theory.
I'm going to refute against not Edith Wharton, sorry, Einstein's theory of relativity. What does that mean? I think John has a good point. What does that mean?
Well, for me, it was an example of his own pride.
Yes,
and
excellent.
foolishness, actually.
Exactly, because he wants to show that I'm the authority, right? Einstein is a great man, but I'm greater than him, right? So for Betsy, actually, you notice within the brackets, Henry James wrote unfinished novel, which is entitled The Ivory Tower. What is Ivory Tower? We are living in the Ivory Tower, right? Every one of us in this building, every one of us it belongs to this tower. That means we're not interested in things outside the world, right? We want to stay in the library, doing our research, get promoted, and then what? Get retired, right? Enjoy life. So that's probably is a universal theme. I think in this novel, the protagonist is named Greg, and the themes of investment and also the disconnection between the high-minded professor and this short story are quite clear. The link is quite clear. So we see that Mr. Loring is doing the same thing as Mr. Barrett is doing in Henry James' story. But what is different from Henry James' story is our female protagonist. For male writers, they totally approach in a different way. So for Wharton's story, we have Bessie's what? Bessie is so... Which word would you use for those who have read more than twice or more than once? She is so what?
Flamboyant?
Yeah, flamboyant, vivacious, right? And she's so assertive. I think she's very much different from Amy Evans, because Amy Evans simply says, "Oh, I admire you. I have read your novel 3 times." But for Bessie, for the Russian princess, she simply snatches off the earpads of this professor and talks to him. Okay, you are not even aware that your train is delayed, right? You should be ashamed of yourself for being that. You are doing not a great thing. You are trying to isolate yourself, but that's not the proper way of doing things. So she tries to exert a kind of influence on him. In what way? She says that, I'm not going to ask you for the autograph because this Mr. Lorry is as vain as Mr. Barrage in the other story. Because she said that, no, I'm not expecting your autograph. I'm expecting to help you because you have no money. And talking about money, we must remember one fact, that for Henry James, he was very poor. He needed a lot of money. But for the Ivory Tower, Edith Wharton asked her publisher, Scribner, to give her royalties for her novels to Henry James, which is £8,000, without letting Henry James know that fact. So actually we know this is a humiliating fact, but for Henry James, he suspected of that knowledge. So we can see the fatal blow that Edith Wharton tries to deliver in her story. So in this sense, Bessie succeeds actually in interpreting herself, because in the story she says that I'm going to interpret myself. I'm not going to expect others to do that for me. I'm not going to expect you to write a preface for me. I'm going to do on my own, and I believe in my capability. So when Bessie says, "Oh, master," to the wrong person, you can imagine the humiliation that this professor suffers. You must be wrong about, and then Bessie says, "Oh, I thought you were the vulgar theater manager," but we can see that in this way, Bessie actually articulates her way of doing things, her values. And at the same time, we know that she also successfully silenced Mr. Loring, because Mr. Loring later has lost not only his faith, dignity, but also his fortune, which is exactly what Henry James experienced in his later time. And just now, when we discussed this short story, we found that we missed one point, that is the conniving narrator. For Henry James, he arranges the narrator to focalize on Mr. Barrage. So everything he observes is true, is reliable, which is not reliable at all. But for Edith Wharton's story, we have the collaborating narrator. And this narrator is totally very objective. And also this narrator gives more voice to this female playwright, the Russian princess. So we can see that in the end of the story, we find the word is used, princely. The princess says something in a princely manner, which means she is the dominant one instead of Mr. Lorry, the professor, the absent-minded and no good, incapable. So here's my conclusion. I want to emphasize my point. That is, Edith Wharton parodies Henry James in her story of Velvet Earpads by subverting the master narrative. By master narrative, I mean the dominant discourse. And also I mean Henry James, because he is known as master in his life, and he thoroughly enjoyed that. And also Wharton successfully articulates her values. For James, he believes in the atmosphere of the mind, the air of reality, But for Wharton, she believes that it's not a kind of writing novels is not a kind of reflection of what you see. It's a kind of projection. That means you really have you add your observation to your stories. So you notice that my title of the presentation is "Fish the Mirrors Up." What does that mean? Actually, I got this from the Writing of Fiction by Edith Wharton. She said that words are the exterior symbols of thought, and it is only by the exact use that the writer can keep the close and patient hold, which fishes the mirrors up. You know, the mirrors is really very hard to be fished up from the rocks in the sea. So she tries to say that I'm going to do that in my own close and patient way. You know, James passed away in 1916, and this short story was published in 1926. So Jane Wharton waited for about a decade after he died, finally, which is pathetic, because when he was alive, she could not have done that, considering his vulnerability or maybe his other factors. So Steve's creating in unfading colors. So talking about these unfading colors, I'm sure you will agree with me that Wharton's story is more popular, is more touching to you. And this is a list of works that I have cited. And these are interesting quotes from George. And I think we can just read them very briefly and see if you like it. Now, first quote. Now, who would like to? Loken, would you like to read it for us? The first part? Yes. Yes, read it, please. Thank you.
Okay. Settled himself in a corner of his compartment in the Marseilles Ventimiglia Express, drew his velvet earbuds from his pockets, slipped them over his ears, and began to think.
Okay, what do you think? What do you think? Began to think. What do you think of this quote?
Sorry, I have no idea.
How about Elizabeth?
Sorry, the novel.
Sorry, how about Elizabeth? What's your impression of
Well,
it?
it seems that he went back into his own little world. He wasn't going to allow himself to be moved, changed.
Right. So this means that he's really determined or confident about doing this. Yeah, very good. And then how about the next one? Lin Jue, would you like to read it for us? The second part. Okay, how about Philip?
Okay.
Thank
He
you.
would have preferred that the world should contain nothing to see, nothing to smell, nothing to hear. He had sheathed himself in a general impenetrability of which the ear pads were merely a restricted symbol.
Okay, your response, please.
Well, you know this is from this paragraph where the point is made. Doesn't even look at pretty women. He's totally into his writing, and of course the whole story is predicated on the fact she bothers him. She's actually asking him for a thank you. She wants to say thank you to him, and of course from there it just builds. Keeps getting worse for him. He doesn't use the ear pads, and he's exposed to the world of Monte Carlo. And
Yes,
princess
exactly.
And all that stuff.
Exactly. He fails to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he fails to do that. Very funny.
Yeah. Actually, it says he doesn't even smell things or see things. I mean.
Exactly. Talking about the senses, we all have senses, right? Smell, what else? Sight and the hearing. Then what about, touch? How about this paragraph? I like this one very much, really. Let me see. These two paragraphs. George, would you like to read them for us? Because
Sure.
these are favorite ones. Yeah.
The train stopped with a jerk, which flung him abruptly out of his corner. His mental balance was disturbed, and for one irritating instant, his gaze unwillingly rested on silver groves, purple promontories, and a blue sea. Ugh, scenery, he muttered. They were only two objects on which he flattered himself he could always look with a perfectly unseeing eye. And these were a romantic landscape and a pretty woman. and he was not absolutely sure about the landscape.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, he was not sure about the landscape, nor is he sure about Pretty Woman, because he actually finally is charmed by this beautiful Russian princess. But eventually we know that this is Wharton's success by silencing it, because in the end we no longer hear the voice of Mr. Loring. Now this is a lovely image from George. What do you think it is?
Google velvet ear pads, and then click on shopping.
Wow.
And there'll be hundreds of these things for sale. And they call
Isn't that
velvet
amazing?
ear pads.
Do they use them to sleep?
They use it for gaming, it says, yeah.
Exactly.
Cut the
So-
world out.
Yeah, like those bows.
And those ones for airplanes?
Yeah,
Yeah, noise
Yeah. Isn't it amazing to see that this type of headsets are known for what? Velvet ear pads. So what a great irony. Actually, so if you are willing to isolate yourself from the world, go and check the website and buy a pair. But you know, the smartest person is always in the room, right? So some Bessie or some other, Amy probably will snatch off your ear pads very successfully and engage you in this world, which will make you totally awake, get awakened to the reality of gender, of living, of writing. Because in that sense, you can even write better. Because without, engaging yourself in the world, it's really very hard to write a good work.